On a quiet winter night, a Marine named Daniel Brooks was running through a snow-covered park when he noticed something no one else stopped for. A young golden retriever sitting alone in the snow, not barking, not running, just waiting. Someone had left her there and never came back. As footsteps echoed in the darkness, Daniel faced a choice that had nothing to do with orders, only conscience. What happened next would change more than one life forever. Before we begin, please take a moment to subscribe and leave a like. Your support truly means the world to us. And tell us where you're watching from. Drop your city in the comments below. Snow fell steadily over the park, thick and soundless, turning the night into a muted corridor of light and shadow. The air was cold enough to sting the lungs, the kind of cold that made every breath feel deliberate. Daniel Brooks ran because the silence followed him if he didn't move. At 34, Daniel carried the unmistakable frame of a Marine, even in civilian clothes. He was tall-built, lean rather than bulky, with shoulders that stayed squared by habit more than intention. His face was sharply structured cheekbones, pronounced jaw set, beneath a close-trimmed dark beard. There were faint lines around his eyes that came not from smiling, but from years spent scanning horizons, anticipating outcomes. His hair was kept short, regulation short even now, though no one was inspecting him anymore. People often described Daniel as quiet. They rarely understood that quietness was something he had learned, not chosen. During his years in the Marines, silence had been useful. It kept him alive. It kept others alive. But since coming home, the same silence had a way of filling up with things he hadn't dealt with yet. Faces, names, decisions that could not be undone. Running helped. It gave his thoughts a pace they could follow without overtaking him. Beside him ran Max. Max was a German shepherd, 4 years old, large without being heavy, his sable coat dark along the spine and lighter at the chest and legs. His ears stood tall, angled forward even as he ran, constantly adjusting to sound. His eyes were alert and intelligent, a deep brown that missed very little. Max had once been a working dog, trained for patrol and detection. He still moved like one, purposeful, controlled, never frantic. They ran in sync, the leash slack between them, neither pulling nor falling behind. The park was nearly empty at this hour. Most of the paths were softened by snow footprints blurring into one another. The lamps cast pale yellow circles that barely touched, leaving long stretches of darkness between them. Trees stood stripped of leaves, branches etched black against the sky. Daniel passed the old playground without looking at it. The swings creaked faintly in the wind chains, stiff with ice. He had learned to avoid places that invited reflection. Max slowed. Not abruptly, not alarmed. Just enough for Daniel to feel the change through the leash. Daniel eased his pace and followed Max's line of sight. Near one of the benches, half buried in snow beneath a flickering lamp, sat a dog. A golden retriever puppy. She was young. Not a tiny puppy, but not grown either, somewhere in the awkward space between dependence and independence. Her coat was a soft pale gold dulled by snow clinging to her back and tail. Her ears hung low, framing a narrow face that looked too serious for her age. She sat upright instead of curled posture, stiff paws tucked close beneath her chest, as if she had learned to make herself small. There was no collar around her neck. No leash. No human nearby. She didn't bark. She didn't run. Daniel stopped completely. Max halted beside him, body tense but quiet ears locked forward. He did not lunge or growl. He simply watched. Daniel's first instinct was to scan the area. Years of training took over before emotion could catch up. He swept the tree line, the far path, the dark spaces between lamps. No movement, no voices, just falling snow and the distant hum of traffic beyond the park fence. The puppy's eyes met his. They were dark, reflective, and oddly calm. Not curious, not frightened, just watchful. Daniel crouched slowly, careful not to startle her, and held out one gloved hand. "Hey," he said softly, his voice low and even. "It's okay." The puppy did not move toward him. She did not move away either. Instead, her gaze shifted past Daniel, past Max, to the narrow path that curved deeper into the park. The snow there was thinner, disturbed by recent footsteps that hadn't yet been fully erased. She stared at that path with a fixed intensity, head tilted slightly, ears angling forward. Daniel followed her gaze. Someone had been there not long ago. Daniel felt a familiar pressure settle in his chest, the kind that came when something didn't fit the pattern it should have. Max stepped forward a half pace, then lay down on the snow without command. His posture was relaxed but ready, head-lifted, eyes still on the puppy. He made himself smaller, non-threatening. The Golden glanced at him briefly, then returned her attention to the path. Daniel studied her more closely now. She wasn't emaciated. Her ribs didn't show sharply. Her coat beneath the snow looked clean. Her paws were intact pads, not cracked or bleeding. This wasn't a dog that had been on her own for long. This was a dog that had belonged somewhere. Recently. "Are you waiting for someone?" Daniel asked, though he didn't expect an answer. The puppy's tail shifted once, a small, restrained movement, then went still again. Daniel straightened slightly and looked around again. The park was too quiet. The kind of quiet that came after people left, not before they arrived. Snow muffled sound, but it couldn't erase presence entirely. Then he heard it. Footsteps, distant, soft, uneven. They came from somewhere beyond the trees, not close enough to pinpoint, but real enough to tighten every muscle in Daniel's body. Max's ears snapped forward, his body rising from the ground in one smooth motion. The puppy reacted instantly. Her posture changed, not excitement, not fear, but expectation. She leaned forward, weight shifting onto her front paws, eyes locked on the darkness where the sound had come from. Her breathing quickened, barely visible in the cold air. For a moment, Daniel thought she might bolt toward the sound. She didn't. The footsteps slowed, then stopped. Silence returned, heavier than before. Daniel stayed perfectly still, counting his breaths, listening past the ringing in his ears. Nothing followed. Whoever had made the sound was either gone or standing somewhere unseen. Daniel lowered himself again, closer now, snow soaking into his knees. He extended his hand once more, palm open. The puppy finally looked at him. She didn't step forward. She didn't step back. She simply held his gaze for a long second, then turned her head again toward the path, eyes searching the darkness, as if the night itself had broken a promise. She did not run to him. She did not leave. Daniel bent lower, reaching his hand toward her. The Golden only watched him, then turned her head back toward the trail, as if she were still waiting for someone to come back. Far away footsteps sounded again in the snow. The footsteps did not return. They faded the way sound always did in falling snow. First, uncertain, then gone, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier for having been disturbed. The park settled into itself again. The lamps hummed faintly. Snow continued to gather on benches, branches, and fur. The golden retriever puppy was still there. She shifted once a small adjustment of her paws against the cold ground, but she did not stand. Her eyes moved from the empty trail back to Daniel, then away again, as if checking the answer twice and still not believing it. There was no panic in her body, no frantic searching, just a quiet endurance that made Daniel's chest tighten. He exhaled slowly. Up close, he could see more clearly now. The puppy's coat was thick, but damp with melting snow, pale gold along her sides, darker at the ears. Her muzzle was slender, still holding the softness of youth. She wasn't shivering violently, but her muscles were tight, conserving heat. Her breathing was shallow, controlled. "She's not hurt," Daniel said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. Max lowered himself beside her without command, his body long and solid against the snow. He angled his side toward the puppy, sharing warmth the way working dogs did instinctively. The golden glanced at him, surprised, then leaned just slightly closer without fully touching. Daniel noticed the restraint. This was not a feral dog. This was a dog that had learned rules. He crouched again, closer now, careful to move slowly. He extended his hand once more, stopping halfway, letting her decide the distance. His glove brushed the air near her nose. She sniffed, tentative, then withdrew eyes, flicking back toward the trail. Daniel straightened enough to ease pressure off his knees. The cold had begun to seep through his pants, numbing the joint. He welcomed it. Physical discomfort was easier than uncertainty. He scanned the park again. No movement, no approaching headlights, no silhouettes near the fence. Whoever had walked away had made their choice. Daniel felt the weight of his own. He reached into the pocket of his jacket and pulled out his knit cap, dark gray, worn thin from years of use. Slowly he set it down on the bench near the puppy, then stepped back. The cap darkened as snow settled onto it. The golden watched the motion carefully. After a long moment, she leaned forward and nosed the cap, then sat back again, as if unsure what accepting it might mean. Max shifted, pressing his flank closer to her. This time, the golden allowed contact. Her shoulder rested briefly against his side. The tension in her posture eased by a fraction. Daniel noticed something else then. She wasn't scanning randomly. She kept returning her gaze to the same section of trail, the same bend between trees. Not searching, waiting. "How long have you been here?" Daniel asked. The puppy's ears flicked at the sound of his voice, but her attention didn't leave the path. Daniel stood brushing snow from his gloves. He had run these paths often enough to know the neighborhood around the park. Apartments to the east, a row of townhouses to the north, a parking lot on the far side unlit after midnight. If someone had planned to abandon a dog, this was a place that made sense. Public, open, easy to leave without being seen. He hated how familiar that logic felt. Daniel checked his phone. No missed calls, no messages. The screen glowed briefly before he slipped it back into his pocket. Animal control would be closed at this hour. Emergency lines existed, but they moved slowly, and slowly was not something the night offered. The golden lowered her head slightly, tucking her chin toward her chest, conserving warmth. Her eyes stayed open. Daniel crouched again this time, closer than before, careful not to block her view of the trail. "You don't have to stay," he said quietly, not sure who the words were meant for. "You can come with us, or you can go." The puppy did not move. Max glanced back at Daniel, then at the golden, then back again. There was no impatience in his expression, just attention. Daniel felt the choice settle into him, heavy but clear. Leaving her here would mean trusting the system, trusting that someone else would come, trusting that the night would be kind enough to wait. He had trusted systems before. Sometimes they worked, sometimes they didn't. Daniel unzipped his jacket and shrugged it off, the cold biting immediately through his shirt. He knelt and draped the jacket loosely over the puppy's back, careful not to startle her. The fabric settled around her shoulders. She stiffened for a moment, then stayed still. Her head turned slightly, eyes lifting to meet his for the first time without immediately returning to the trail. There was no gratitude there, no relief, only a question. Daniel stood, pulling his gloves back on. "All right," he said quietly. "We'll give it a minute." They waited. Snow continued to fall. The park remained empty. The trail stayed dark. No one came back. The Golden finally shifted, rising slowly to her feet. She took one step forward, then stopped, looking again toward the bend in the path. Her tail hung low, motionless. After a long moment, she turned, not toward Daniel, not toward Max, but toward the bench where his jacket lay, partly covering her tracks. She sat again. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. That was the answer. He took a step back, giving her space, and clipped Max's leash shorter. Not to pull, just to be ready. "You don't belong out here," he said softly. The Golden did not argue. Daniel's apartment was small, clean, and quiet, in the way places became when one person lived alone for a long time. It sat above a closed bakery on a side street, the windows fogging slightly as warm air met winter glass. Daniel toed off his shoes by the door and set his keys down in the same shallow dish he always used. The Golden followed him inside without hesitation. She paused just past the threshold, paws placed neatly on the mat, snow melting into dark speckles beneath her. She didn't rush forward. She didn't circle. She simply stood there, watching. When Daniel shrugged out of his jacket and hung it on the hook by the door, her head tracked the motion, precisely, eyes moving with each lift and turn of his arm. That small detail landed heavier than he expected. This was not a dog guessing how to behave. This was a dog remembering. Max padded in behind her and shook, once scattering snow across the tile. The Golden flinched at the sound, then relaxed when nothing followed. She glanced at Max, then back to Daniel, checking both as if confirming the rules were still the same. Daniel crouched and slid a bowl of water across the floor. The Golden approached slowly, sniffed once, then took a few careful laps. No gulping, no urgency. She stopped before finishing, lifted her head and looked at Daniel again. "You can drink," he said gently. She did, but only after he stepped back. Daniel set out a small portion of kibble softened with warm water. The Golden sniffed, licked once, then sat. She waited. Only when Daniel turned away to wash his hands did she eat small bites, spaced with pauses, ears flicking at every sound in the apartment. When she finished, she returned to the mat by the door and sat again. Daniel leaned against the counter, arms crossed, studying her in silence. He had lived with dogs long enough to read patterns, but this one didn't fit neatly. She wasn't shut down. She wasn't fearful. She was careful, attentive in a way that suggested someone had once expected her to be. He exhaled and glanced at the clock. If there was a chance someone was looking for her, it would start at the place she'd been left. Daniel clipped Max's leash on again and pulled his boots back on. The Golden stood immediately alert, eyes, bright tail lifting a fraction. "You're staying," he said softly. She hesitated, then lay down, chin on her paws, watching him leave. The park looked different under brighter lights. Snow still fell, but thinner now, revealing details the dark had hidden. Daniel scanned the bench where he'd first seen her. The jacket he'd left was gone, folded neatly on the slats. That too meant something. He walked the perimeter, eyes on the ground. Near the base of the bench, half buried in snow, was a canvas tote, the kind sold cheap at grocery stores. One strap was torn. The fabric was soaked through, stiff with ice. Daniel crouched and lifted it carefully. Inside were children's things. A plastic dinosaur with one missing eye. A knit mitten, small blue, stretched thin at the fingers. A folded paper stained where ink had bled from melting snow. But there was no writing left, just the ghost of words pressed too lightly to last. At the bottom, wrapped in a grocery receipt, was a tennis ball, chewed soft at the edges. Daniel's jaw tightened. He stood there longer than he meant to, the park quiet around him, trying to imagine how these things had been set down. Whether it had been rushed, whether someone had looked back. He took the bag with him. Back at the apartment, the Golden lifted her head the moment he stepped inside. Her eyes went to the bag, then to Daniel's face. She rose and approached slowly, nose working tail still. Daniel set the tote on the floor and stepped back. She sniffed the edge, then froze. Her body went rigid, breath shallow. She lowered herself carefully and nudged the bag with her nose twice. When the bag didn't move, she pressed her forehead against it and stayed there unmoving. Daniel knelt nearby, close enough to be present, far enough not to intrude. "It was there," he said quietly. "I found it where you were waiting." The Golden's ears flicked at his voice. She shifted, then carefully reached inside the tote and pulled out the mitten. She held it for a moment, then set it down and rested her chin on it, eyes closing halfway. Daniel swallowed. This wasn't confusion, this was recognition. He stayed with her until her breathing slowed again. When she finally lifted her head, she looked at him with something new in her eyes, not trust exactly, but a loosening. As if a question had been answered, even if it wasn't the one she wanted. Daniel folded the tote closed and set it on a shelf within her sight. The Golden watched him do it, then lay down near Mac's body, angled toward the door, but no longer fixed on it. Outside, snow continued to fall. Inside, something had shifted. The post went up just after sunrise. Daniel wrote it carefully, choosing neutral words and avoiding judgment. "Found young golden retriever last night at Riverside Park. Female, no collar. Please message with details if she's yours." He added the time, the location, and nothing more. Within an hour, the post gathered reactions, sympathy, guesses, warnings. By noon, there were private messages that offered vague claims and blurry photos. Daniel replied politely and asked for specifics. The Golden watched him from the doorway as he typed. Her body relaxed but alert, ears shifting with every notification sound. She had slept through the night without pacing, curled near Max's flank, rising only when Daniel moved. That steadiness felt earned, not assumed. By evening, the messages narrowed to one thread. They arrived just after dark. Daniel heard the knock through the apartment before Max did, firm but hesitant, the sound of someone unsure whether they should be there. When Daniel opened the door, a young couple stood in the hallway beneath the flickering light. The woman stepped forward first. She was in her late 20s, slim with straight chestnut hair, pulled into a loose ponytail. Her skin was pale winter dry, and her hands were tucked into the sleeves of an oversized coat, as if she needed something to hold on to. Her eyes moved quickly, scanning the apartment past Daniel's shoulder. She smiled, but it faltered at the edges. "I'm Sarah," she said. Her voice was soft, practiced. "This is my husband, Luke." Luke stood half a step behind her. He was taller, broad-shouldered, with a neatly trimmed beard and a baseball cap pulled low. His jaw was set in a way that suggested defensiveness rather than anger. He nodded once, hands in his pockets, eyes fixed on the floor just inside the doorway. "We saw your post," Sarah continued. "Our daughter lost her dog last night. She's been devastated." Daniel didn't move aside. Behind him, the Golden stood still, her body aligned with the wall. She wasn't hiding, but she wasn't approaching either. Her eyes flicked to Sarah, then to Luke, then back to Daniel. Max rose silently and positioned himself at Daniel's knee, blocking the line between the visitors and the dog. "What's her name?" Daniel asked. Sarah hesitated for a fraction of a second. "Sunny." The Golden's ears did not lift. Daniel nodded once. "How old is she?" "About 5 months," Luke answered quickly. "Golden retriever. We got her in the fall." "And where did you lose her?" Daniel asked. Sarah's gaze dropped. "At the park," she said. "Riverside. We thought she was right behind us." Daniel waited. "She slipped her leash," Luke added. "It happens." Daniel looked at the Golden. Her tail was low, unmoving. She did not lean forward. She did not whine. "Do you have photos?" Daniel asked. Sarah pulled out her phone, hands trembling slightly, and scrolled. The images showed a golden puppy on a couch, a child's hand tangled in her fur, a tennis ball clamped between small teeth. The dog in the photos looked like the one standing in Daniel's apartment. Younger, cleaner, happier. Daniel studied the photos carefully. He noted the collar in every image, red, faded. The Golden at his feet wore none. "Where's her collar now?" he asked. Luke's jaw tightened. "We took it off. She didn't like it." Max shifted his weight, a low warning hum in his chest. Daniel raised a hand, steadying him. Sarah stepped forward. "Can we see her?" she asked. "Please." Daniel didn't answer right away. The Golden's eyes moved again to the door, then back to Daniel. She did not step forward. Her body stayed aligned with his leg, not pressed against it, but close enough to choose it. "That's her," Sarah said softly, her voice breaking. She took another step. "Sunny." The Golden did not respond. Luke cleared his throat. "She's probably confused. Dogs get like that." Daniel felt something settle in his chest, slow and heavy. "She's not confused," he said. "She's deciding." Sarah's eyes filled. "Our daughter's been crying all day." Daniel nodded. "I found a bag at the park," he said, "with children's things in it." Sarah froze. Luke's eyes flicked to her, then back to Daniel. "It wasn't supposed to be like that," Sarah said quietly. "We just needed time." Daniel didn't ask what she meant. He didn't need to. Outside, footsteps echoed in the stairwell. Neighbors returning home, doors opening and closing. The building felt suddenly too small for the truth hovering between them. "Animal control can sort this out," Luke said. "Legally." "Yes," Daniel replied. "They can." He looked down at the Golden again. She stood, took one tentative step toward Sarah, then stopped. Her head lowered. She turned back and sat beside Max. No excitement, no relief, just clarity. Daniel straightened. "I'll contact animal control in the morning," he said evenly. "They'll handle next steps." Sarah's shoulders sagged. Luke said nothing. They left without raising their voices. The hallway light flickered once more as the door closed behind them. Inside, the Golden exhaled and lay down. Max settled beside her, watchful but calm. Daniel stood in the quiet apartment, knowing that the law would speak soon and hoping it would listen. The call came mid-morning, clipped and professional. Daniel stood by the kitchen window as he listened, one hand braced against the counter. Outside, the street was gray with slush, yesterday's snow compacted into dull ridges along the curb. Inside, the apartment was quiet, except for Max's steady breathing and the faint hum of the refrigerator. If there's a dispute, the woman on the phone said the animal needs to be surrendered to county control until ownership is determined. Her name was Karen Lowell, according to the caller ID. She spoke with the calm precision of someone who had delivered the same explanation many times. Late 40s, Daniel guessed, with a voice trained to stay neutral, even when neutrality felt like avoidance. "I understand," Daniel replied. "Good," Karen said. "Bring the dog in by tomorrow morning. We'll take it from there." She said it not unkindly. Procedural, correct. When the call ended, Daniel didn't move right away. Golden lay near the doorway, chin on her paws, eyes following the line of the door frame. She had begun doing that the night before, settling close to Daniel's boots, positioning herself so she could see the hallway beyond the apartment door. Not guarding, watching. At night, she pressed closer. She didn't sleep deeply. Daniel noticed it in the way her ears flicked at distant sounds, the way her body tensed when voices drifted up from the street. When strangers passed too near the building, she turned her face away, avoiding eye contact, choosing stillness over curiosity. She trusted Daniel and Max. She did not trust anything beyond them. Daniel lay awake on the couch, boots still on, listening to the rhythm of 3 different breaths. He had slept in worse places. The problem wasn't restlessness, it was the waiting. In the Marines, waiting had always come with structure, orders, timelines, consequences defined before the first step was taken. Here, there was only implication. The next afternoon, Daniel took Golden for a walk. He chose the long route looping away from the park. He kept his pace slow, letting her stop and sniff when she wanted. She walked well on the leash, loose and careful, never pulling. When people passed, she angled her body away, eyes lowered. A woman with a stroller smiled and waved. Golden did not look up. At the corner, near the grocery store, a man crouched to greet her, hand extended, voice high and cheerful. Golden stepped back immediately, ears flattening. Daniel tightened the leash slightly, not to restrain her, but to communicate presence. "She's a shy," Daniel said. The man shrugged and moved on. Back at the apartment, Daniel filled out the intake form Karen had emailed. Name unknown, breed golden retriever, age estimated 6 months, reason for surrender disputed ownership. His fingers hesitated over the keyboard. He left the name blank. That night, Golden returned to the door again. She sat there, as if on watch, tail curled neatly around her paws, eyes fixed on the dark rectangle of the hallway beyond the peephole. Daniel watched her from the couch, heart tight. "You won't see it," he said quietly. "Not tonight." Golden didn't turn. Daniel rose and joined her, sitting on the floor beside her. Max followed, lowering himself on her other side, a solid presence on both flanks. Golden leaned into him, then rested her shoulder against Daniel's knee. Daniel closed his eyes. He remembered standing at a checkpoint years earlier, heat rising off asphalt, the air thick with dust and impatience. A choice made in seconds had followed him for months afterward. The rules had been clear, the outcome less so. This was different, and somehow the same. Morning came without clarity. Daniel clipped Max's leash on and reached for Golden's. She stood immediately, tail still, eyes alert. As they stepped into the hallway, a door down the corridor opened. A woman in a wool coat stepped out, keys jingling. She was in her early 60s, short and sturdy, with steel gray hair cut blunt at her jaw. Her face was weathered skin, creased by cold, and sun eyes, sharp but kind. She paused when she saw the Golden. "That's a beautiful dog," she said. "Thank you," Daniel replied. "She yours?" Daniel hesitated. "Not exactly." The woman nodded as if she understood more than he'd said. "I'm Mrs. Alvarez," she offered. "Third floor." Golden glanced up at her briefly, then looked away again. Mrs. Alvarez studied the dog, then Daniel. "She's been hurt," she said quietly. Daniel didn't correct her. Mrs. Alvarez adjusted her scarf. "Sometimes doing the right thing looks messy from the outside," she added. "Doesn't mean it's wrong." She continued down the stairs without waiting for an answer. Daniel stood still for a long moment. At the park's edge, Golden stopped. Not the bench, not the trail. She stopped at the gate, turned, and looked at Daniel. Not pleading, not fearful, simply asking. Daniel felt the question land where rules didn't reach. That night, Golden returned to the door one last time. She stood there for a while, then turned away and curled beside Max instead. Daniel watched her breathe slow and steady. Tomorrow morning, he would make a choice. Snow drifted lightly across the old park, thin and steady, the kind that softened edges without hiding them. The lamps were dimmer in daylight, their yellow halos pale against the gray afternoon. Daniel stood near the gate with Max at his side and the Golden on a loose lead. He felt the quiet in his bones, the calm that came before something irreversible. They arrived first. Daniel unclipped the leash and let it fall to the ground, not as a test, as an invitation. Golden didn't move right away. She stood with her paws planted tail low, but relaxed eyes scanning the familiar lines of the park. The bench was there, the curve of the path, the place where waiting had once made sense. Max shifted once, then sat steady and unassuming. He didn't look at her. He didn't need to. Footsteps approached from the far side of the path. Sarah and Luke came into view together this time. Sarah walked a half step ahead, her coat belted tight shoulders drawn inward. Her hair was loose today, chestnut strands catching snow as they fell, framing a face already flushed from cold and emotion. Her eyes were red-rimmed lashes, clumped from earlier tears she hadn't bothered to hide. Luke followed with his hands buried in his pockets. He looked tired, in a way sleep didn't fix, jaw rough, with stubble eyes, dulled by nights spent arguing in circles. He had shaved the beard down since their last visit, leaving sharper lines to his face, as if he were trying to look more certain than he felt. They stopped several yards away. Golden noticed them immediately. Her ears tipped forward, her head lifted. She took one step toward them, then paused. Snow settled on her back and melted slowly, darkening the fur along her spine. Daniel said nothing. Sarah dropped to one knee, breath visible in the cold. "Sonny," she said softly, not pleading, not calling, just saying the name like a memory she wasn't sure she was allowed to keep. Golden looked at her, then at Luke, then back toward the bench. Daniel watched the space between them stretch and thin. "Take your time," he said quietly, not to Golden, but to the moment itself. Golden turned her head and looked at Daniel, not the way she had before, not checking, not asking permission, choosing. She took a step toward him. The movement was small, almost hesitant, but it broke something open. Her body followed two more steps, then another, until she stood close enough for her shoulder to brush his leg. She leaned into him briefly, then straightened, facing the others again with Daniel at her side. Sarah's breath hitched. She pressed a hand to her mouth. Luke exhaled slowly, shoulders sagging. "She's not ours," Sarah said, the words spilling out now that the waiting had ended. "We wanted her to be. We really did." But everything felt heavy. The baby, the move the nights without sleep. We thought giving her space would help. We thought we'd come back. Her voice cracked. We didn't. Daniel listened without judgment. He didn't need to supply it. "I didn't know how to say that without sounding like a bad person," she continued. "So I didn't say it at all." Golden stood still, calm, present. Luke nodded, once eyes on the ground. "She deserves better than what we were giving," he said. The admission looked like it hurt him physically. I didn't want to admit that. The park felt suddenly larger, the silence gentler. A woman approached from the path behind them, clipboard tucked under one arm. Marilyn Chen, the county officer assigned to the case, moved with efficient calm. She was in her early 50s, medium height, hair pulled into a low bun that showed silver at the temples. Her expression was neutral, but not cold. Someone who had learned to make space for difficult truths. "We can finalize this here," Marilyn said evenly, "if both parties agree." Daniel nodded. Sarah wiped her face and stood. She took one tentative step forward, then stopped herself. "Can I say goodbye?" she asked. Daniel looked down at Golden. Golden watched Sarah closely. After a long moment, she stepped forward on her own. Just one step, close enough to be acknowledged, not close enough to be taken. Sarah knelt again, hands resting on her thighs. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I really am." Golden sniffed the air, then turned away. That was enough. Marilyn completed the paperwork with quiet efficiency, explaining each line as she went. Daniel signed where she pointed. The ink felt heavier than it should have, like it carried more than a name. When it was done, Marilyn handed him a copy. "She's yours," she said simply. Sarah nodded, tears falling freely now. Luke placed a hand on her back. They left without looking back again, not out of cruelty, but understanding. The park emptied. Daniel clipped the leash back on, not tight, just present. Golden walked beside him, without hesitation. That night the apartment felt different. Golden explored once, then settled between Daniel and Max, her body curved into theirs, like she'd always known where she belonged. She slept deeply, breathing slow and even, paws twitching once before going still. Outside, winter continued. Snow fell again, soft and unrelenting. Inside, no one waited anymore. Sometimes miracles don't arrive with thunder or light. Sometimes they arrive quietly in the form of a choice. A man choosing to stay when walking away would be easier. A dog choosing to trust when fear would be safer. And in that space between fear and courage, God often does his work. We like to think miracles are rare, but the truth is this. Every time someone stops, every time someone sees what others ignore, every time someone chooses mercy over convenience, that is grace moving through ordinary life. If this story touched your heart, let it move beyond the screen. Share it with someone who might need a reminder that goodness still exists. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what moment in your life felt like a quiet miracle. And if you believe even a little that no life is ever truly forgotten, subscribe and stay with us. These stories are for those who still choose to see. May God bless you, protect you, and guide you. May he soften your heart without weakening your strength, and may no one who is waiting in the cold be left unseen tonight.